So I'd like to say thank you and welcome. We're here tonight to have a public meeting on the Cheltenham Drive Bikeway feasibility study. The limits of the project are from Wisconsin Avenue to Pearl Street in Bethesda. So thank you all for joining us. We're very excited about presenting our findings. Tonight's meeting agenda, we'll start with some housekeeping items, beginning with some of the manual Zoom controls for those of you that just need some kind of basic review of the features. Then I will introduce our project design team. And then we will have a 45-minute presentation on the Cheltenham Bikeway feasibility study. The first item will be the project background, why we initiated this project, a review of the existing conditions analysis, and then a discussion of the design alternatives that we are planning on presenting as proposals, and then the next steps to follow. We also have about 50 minutes afterwards for public feedback, questions, and discussion. And if we stay on schedule, we should adjourn by 8:50 or 9 o'clock. So our project team, and my name is Pat Shepard. I am the Bikeways program manager for Montgomery County. I'm with the Department of Transportation. I'd like to introduce Corey Pitts. Corey.
Good evening, everyone.
And then our consultant team consists of Aditya, and he is with Kittleson and Associates.
Hey, thanks, Pat. Hi, everyone. Glad to be here tonight to present this project. My name is Aditya Inamdar. I'm the consultant team project manager, and I'm working with Caitlin Mildner and Matteo and Thienan from Kittleson as well.
Thank you. So Aditya, would you like to go over the Zoom controls?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Pat. So today's meeting, as you can see, we're using the Zoom platform, and we want to kind of show some quick kind of tools to help you guide through the meeting today. As you would have noted that today's meeting is being recorded, both audio and video, and will be posted on Montgomery County DOT website on the project webpage. If you do not wish to have your voices or likeness recorded, you can turn your video camera off and refrain from asking questions using the audio option during the Q&A session. You can use the chat feature to type in questions. In terms of video, your video camera is off by default. This is done to reduce the bandwidth of the meeting and to ensure that we have limited disruptions. We request you that you please keep your cameras off during the entire duration of the meeting. Everyone joining is on mute. You cannot unmute yourself. We'll unmute during the Q&A session. Again, this is mainly to keep the meeting running smoothly with limited disruptions. If you want to request to speak, you'll need to use the raise hand feature. I have some instructions about that in the next slide. And once we unmute, you would be able to kind of unmute yourself and then ask the question. If anyone is called by telephone, you can unmute yourself by dialing *6 once we unmute you. So on the raise hand feature under the kind of the tool panel at the bottom ribbon of Zoom interface, you would see this reactions icon furthest to the right. If you're not able to see that on some screens, depending on the screen size, they have limited what kind of icons you see here. So there should be a more option if you're not able to see the reactions, and under that more options, you'd be able to click reactions. Once you click on reactions, there would be a new window that appears with different options, and there will be a raise hand button that you can click. And once you click it, we'll be able to see who has raised their hands. And again, we'll kind of unmute and you'll be able to ask questions in the Q&A session. For chat, there is a chat function at the bottom in the same ribbon. You can click on it, and then there'll be another window that pops up, and you can send the question to everyone so that everybody can see that question in the chat box. And again, in the Q&A session, we will kind of discuss all the substantive project related questions one by one. In case there are some logistical questions, Corey or Pat may be able to respond to you in real time. Another setting that we wanted to kind of show was the view setting. If you want to see only the cameras with speakers or the panelists on, then you can go to your start video option at the bottom. There's a little arrow. Once you click that, you would be able to click video settings, and then this window would pop up. And within the video settings, there is another box that says hide, I think, non-video participants. And you can, once you check that box, you'll only see the windows for people who have their cameras on, basically the co-hosts and the hosts. All right, I'm gonna hand it back to Pat to go over project introduction.
Okay. So we're starting with kind of an orientation. Most of you live in the area, but the area, the map to the left shows some red lines. That is our study segment. Cheltenham, of course, is our main focus. However, it is part of a larger context. So the yellow line is the Bethesda Loop. This was something that was developed back in 2018, and I don't know if some of you or any of you attended a meeting held in October of 2018. It was held at the Bethesda Chevy Chase High School. It was a very large public forum. And at that time, we presented many of the projects that are part of this Bethesda Loop, which includes 2 that are under construction currently, which is along Bethesda Avenue and Woodmont. And soon to be under construction will be the Montgomery Lane Avenue segment. So Cheltenham is the northernmost portion of this Bethesda Loop, and it's an important east-west connection. What are our project goals? So first, we wanted to identify the route and the bikeway types to complete the Bethesda Loop between Wisconsin Avenue and Pearl Street. We reviewed previous plans, including the Bethesda Downtown Plan adopted in 2017, the Montgomery County Bicycle Master Plan, and more recently in 2020, the Bethesda Streetscape Plan or guidelines. And we're here tonight because we're here to engage major stakeholders and the community to identify issues, opportunities, and to solicit your feedback. We have been meeting with some of the adjacent property owners over the summer, but this is a part of our effort to reach out to the greater community. Next slide. And as I mentioned, these are the previous plans that were approved back in 2017, 2018, and then most recently the Bethesda Streetscape Standards adopted in 2020. And they do recommend the more recent plans separated bike lanes on Cheltenham Drive between Wisconsin and Tilbury. So that's the reason why we are performing this feasibility study. It was something that we felt was part of a grant that we could submit, and we were awarded grant money from the state of Maryland. Again, it is a feasibility study. So the outcome of tonight's public meeting and all of our analyses will be summarized in a report by the end of this year. The next slide, again, kind of goes through the various segments. And just quickly, Cheltenham Drive between Wisconsin and Pearl it's 2-way between Wisconsin and Tilbury. And then you get to the circle, and then it's 1-way westbound east of Tilbury. So there's certainly some challenges that we found with the 1-way westbound residential streets, parking and narrow cross sections, which Aditya will go into more detail. The other streets, Tilbury to Sleaford to Chase Avenue, that's 1-way northbound between Sleaford to Cheltenham, and then 2-way north of Cheltenham Drive. Chase Avenue is 1-way eastbound between Tilbury to Pearl, and Harleen Lane between Tilbury to Pearl is 1-way eastbound. And then finally, Sleaford from Tilbury to Pearl is currently two-way. So here's our planning process. We have been currently, we launched the project in November of 2020. We've been performing right-of-way topographic surveys in early 2021 as part of our existing conditions analyses. We've been looking at network alternatives and bike facility type alternatives. And now we're here as part of our public and stakeholder feedback. Public participation is very important in developing these alternatives. And after this, we'll synthesize all the comments. We will also have a survey for those who are interested to kind of have a deeper dive into some of specific questions and issues. And once we compile all those comments, that'll be part of our preferred network alternatives and part of our preferred bike facility type alternative. And with those results, we'll start developing our concept design plans and producing a final report with a final presentation. And hopefully this will all be wrapped up. On the next slide, we'll show the schedule that we hope to wrap everything up by the December of this year. And as you can see, we're here where we have a red arrow in September. So we have the next 3 months to wrap everything up. And then with that, I think the part you've all been waiting for is Aditya's presentation. So with that.
Yeah, thanks, Pat. So again, I'm going to start with a little bit of existing conditions analysis and then go into design alternatives. So we started looking at this area. We looked at land use and we quickly identified that there are two context zones. We have the commercial area and the block kind of between Wisconsin Avenue and Tilbury has some commercial land uses. There's a park, some residential with a parking garage, but then beyond the circle at Tilbury Street, the context really changes into single family detached residential neighborhood. And the streetscape and the street widths also change pretty dramatically. So the land use and transportation context really changes at Tilbury Street. And so we're aware of those two context zones. In terms of existing and pedestrian facilities, a lot of the streets have sidewalk on one side. Again, these are kind of narrow residential streets. On the Cheltenham Drive between Tilbury and Wisconsin, we have sidewalks on both sides. And then in terms of bike facilities, there are certain assigned bike routes. Pearl Street currently has sharrow markings and bike route signs. Same with Sleaford. On Tilbury, between Cheltenham and Sleaford, that's the current assigned bike route, and it has signs that indicate that people on bikes should use the sidewalk, which is already a little narrow. And then we have more assigned bike route signs leading people to Woodmont Avenue. And then we have the two-way cycle track that's going to be under construction soon on Woodmont Avenue. And then as part of the bicycle master plan, county has done bicycle level of traffic stress analysis, which kind of indicate which streets within the whole county are kind of less comfortable for people on bikes, most comfortable. And to kind of think this in simple terms, it's really to think about kids going to school or seniors or adults who may not be comfortable riding bike close to vehicular traffic. They're interested in riding a bicycle, but are concerned with the existing facilities. So it's trying to map kind of that qualitative bike facilities about which ones are most comfortable, least stressful, or which ones are more stressful and less comfortable. So in terms of the study area, Wisconsin Avenue is shown as red, basically, which means like it's LTS 4. It is most stressful, least comfortable for people on bikes. And then the Cheltenham Drive, the block between Wisconsin and Tilbury, is kind of somewhat comfortable, some stressful. So again, when we think about people who may not be used to biking regularly, they may not feel comfortable on the street, but people who may be biking regularly are more confident riding with traffic, they may feel this comfortable. So it's kind of in that middle zone. And then once we go into residential neighborhoods, These are narrow one-way residential streets with lower traffic speeds. A lot of these streets already have traffic calming treatments, so they are categorized as comfortable, least stressful streets. But one caveat to add here is because these are a lot of one-way streets, one aspect of our project is to identify what is that eastbound bike route beyond Tilbury. Given that one-way nature, that's kind of the critical piece, because even if these residential streets are narrow, low vehicular speeds and with traffic calming, going against the vehicular traffic flow may be stressful for people on bikes. And then in terms of the countywide bicycle master plan, there are recommended facilities in this area. As Pat mentioned earlier, when we looked at it, these yellow lines indicate separated bike lanes, and that means there is some sort of a vertical separation, whether it's a buffer with flex post or a curved median or landscape medium, some sort of a separator between the bike lane and vehicular traffic. Once we hit Tilbury, there are recommendations for neighborhood greenway, and that basically indicates a road that is shared between bikes and vehicles. So they're not necessarily dedicated bike lanes, but these streets, as I said, are narrow and low vehicular speeds with traffic calming that people on bikes can share it with vehicular traffic. So Tilbury Street, Chase Avenue, and Sleaford Road, and then Pearl Street in the study area have been identified as that neighborhood greenway in the countywide master plan. Parking is a big topic in this area. It's a very sensitive issue. We looked at where the existing parking is, and then basically these blue lines indicate off-peak on-street parking. So there are some on-street spaces on Wisconsin Avenue that are only available in off-peak. So during the AM and PM peak hour, we cannot park on there. And then on Cheltenham Drive, there are 4 parking spaces on the south side of Cheltenham Drive between Wisconsin and Tilbury. There are 2 parking spaces on the north side where the Midas property is next to CVS. And then there are some additional off-peak on-street parking spaces in front of Cheltenham Drive Urban Park. And then on the residential streets, most of the residential area street segments have on-street parking on one side. Cheltenham Drive is actually the only street beyond Tilbury Street where parking is on both sides because it's a little wider than Chase, Harling, or Sleaford. Other important thing to note is Cheltenham Public Parking Garage is on the block, and it's publicly available parking, and it has, I think, 300 plus parking spaces in the study area as well. As part of this study, we received the 2017 Bethesda parking study, and that had some parking occupancy data, and we wanted to kind of share that. And these basically show some tables with the parking spaces that are indicated. So this first row is south side of Cheltenham Drive in front of Acura car dealership, where there are 4 spaces. It has 2-hour restriction. And then based on this 2017 data, these are the occupancy numbers. So it looks like in the evenings, it was fully occupied. Again, this was based on data collected on 2 days. So it is the data that we have, but it may not be like a complete data that you all may be more familiar with. But this is the data we have, and we wanted to present it. On the north side of Cheltenham Drive, near Midas, there are 2 spaces, which has a 1-hour restriction. And again, in the evening, it seems like it was fully occupied. And again, these are averages of over 2 days. On east side, where on Wisconsin Avenue, there is no stopping in the AM and PM peak hour. Otherwise, there's 4 parking spaces in this area on the block, kind of just north of Middleton Lane to Cheltenham Drive. And again, in the evening, it was fully occupied. And then, as I mentioned, the Cheltenham Public Garage, there are 345 total spaces. There isn't any restriction. Some spaces may be short-term spaces. But then again, based on these numbers, it seems like there's a lot more capacity in that parking garage. Then on the residential streets, there is already existing traffic calming treatments, such as these speed humps. Again, the narrow nature of the street cross section with street trees and on-street parking also help with traffic calming. The next few slides, I want to kind of introduce these study segments in a bit more detail, talk about some of the existing dimensions and the lane configurations. So first, we have the Cheltenham Drive between Wisconsin Avenue to the alley, kind of alley between Wisconsin and Tilbury. And this is the wider section where there are 3 lanes, 1 lane in each direction plus a left turn lane. And then there are on-street spaces on the south side, 4 spaces, and then 2 spaces on the north side, as you can see in this photo. The total width is 48 feet curb face to curb face, and the total approximate right-of-way is 80 feet. So we have nice 5 feet kind of green panel with trees and grades, and then 10-foot wide sidewalks on both sides. Beyond the alley to Tilbury Street, the street actually narrows a bit. The right-of-way is still 80 feet, but the curb to curb, it again kind of varies from the narrowest point at the kind of the garage driveway is, I think, 27 feet, and it goes up to 37 feet closer to the circle. But again, it's bi-directional traffic, and there are some parking spaces for off-peak hours on this side, on the north side of the street. And then as we go into the residential part, a lot of these cross sections would look kind of similar to each other. Cheltenham Drive actually is a bit wider. It has 27 feet curb face to curb face. It is one way going westbound, but it has on-street spaces on both sides. And we do recognize that a lot of houses on this block do not have driveways, and they rely on this on-street spaces. So we kind of recognize that. Then Chase Avenue between Tilbury and Pearl. Again, these are kind of narrow residential streets with parking on one side, and there is kind of 4 feet sidewalk back of curb on one side. These are, again, 19 feet curb face to curb face, so pretty narrow, 1 lane of travel, and then on-street parking. Harling Lane, a similar story. It's Chase Avenue actually is the only kind of street in the study area that's a one-way eastbound. Harling Lane is one-way westbound. So is Cheltenham Drive. But again, the dimensions are kind of 22 feet curb face to curb face for Harling Lane with 1 lane of travel and then on-street parking. Sleaford Road from Tilbury to Pearl. This is again a narrow street, 22 feet wide, but this is kind of an interesting condition where this segment is 2-way, but Tilbury Street from Sleaford to Cheltenham Drive is 1-way, and you cannot enter from the circle. So I guess only folks on this block are able to kind of make a right and travel, make a right or left, and then travel to the east on this street. And then bicycle traffic is also bi-directional, and this is part of the assigned bike route currently. And then Pearl Street is a wider street. It's 2-way. It has share markings, kind of indicating that bicyclists can share the lane, and it's again part of the assigned bike route. And finally, Tilbury Street from Sleaford to Cheltenham, it's 1-way. It's 19 feet, but it's just 1 lane of travel. And there are parking restrictions, so there's no on-street parking on this block. And then it goes from Sleaford to Cheltenham. And then north of Cheltenham, it is 22 feet and it's 2-way. There's no on-street parking on that block. So this diagram on this slide kind of summarizes the issues and opportunities from existing conditions. Again, just to kind of summarize, we recognize that 2 distinct land use context zones, the commercial area or the commercial block, and then the residential neighborhood. The traffic circle at Cheltenham Drive kind of marks that change. Many study segments are 1-way narrow residential street. Cheltenham Drive and Norfolk Avenue have similar cross section. And I mentioned that because the eventual goal is to kind of continue the cross section for Cheltenham across Wisconsin along Norfolk to connect to Woodmont Avenue, 2-way separated bike lanes.
And Aditya?
Yeah.
Can you go back for a second? Because I just want to make clear that the dash line that then extends down Woodmont from Norfolk will connect to the Capitol Crescent Trail.
That's right.
And there had been some confusion about the Bethesda Loop being a circle, and that it didn't seem to connect down to the Capitol Crescent Trail, but it does. And, you know, again, the construction activity has been on pause for the last month because of the streetery, but we anticipate to begin the rest of the Woodmont cycle track construction in November. So.
Yeah, no, thank you, Pat, for that. And I think the Bethesda Loop was more of like a loop of facilities in downtown Bethesda, but some of the facilities I can see here on Pearl Street the assigned bike route kind of continues to Jones Bridge Road. So these facilities kind of expand and connect to other facilities, but the loop was more about the downtown Bethesda facilities. All right, so for next section, I'm going to kind of transition into design alternatives. So there are two aspects to our alternatives. One is the network route alternatives that connect Woodmont Avenue to Pearl Street. So how do we kind of find that alignment, especially for eastbound bicycle travel beyond Tilbury? And then the second aspect of our alternatives are what are the bikeway facility type alternatives, especially for Cheltenham Drive between Wisconsin Avenue and Tilbury Street. And again, when we started developing these alternatives, we have referred to these latest and greatest standards, the Bethesda Downtown Plan that was developed in 2017, the Streetscape Standards in 2020, and then the draft Complete Streets plan for the county. And the dimensions that we have in some of these alternatives kind of are directly result of the dimensions that are recommended in these plans. So in terms of the network alignment alternatives, we have three options here. Option A, or alternative A, is kind of Cheltenham Drive, and then south on Tilbury Street, and then Sleaford to connect to Pearl Street. And Sleaford Road would eventually kind of continue as a neighborhood bike route to Georgetown Branch Trail when that connection opens up, which is, I think it's closed for the Purple Line construction currently. But this is the current assigned bike route. The challenge here is that little one block of Tilbury Street is one-way vehicular traffic. So the question is, how do we get people on bikes to travel southbound? And one of the alternatives that we have come up with is to do what we call a contraflow bike lane, which means there's a bike lane on one side of the street, and then the other direction, people share it with vehicular traffic, which is one-way northbound. Alternative B is kind of a straight shot on Cheltenham Drive. This option we recognize has heavy parking impacts on that block because, again, because Cheltenham Drive is one-way westbound, the challenge is if this is the assigned bike route, how are people going to go east? But we do recognize that, that parking is critical for that block, but we wanted to test all these alternatives for their pros and cons. And then alternative C is kind of a loop. You connect Cheltenham Drive, then use Tilbury Street, and then kind of follow the vehicular directions, right? So Chase Avenue is one way eastbound. So that will be kind of the assigned route. And then Sleaford is kind of the natural westbound traffic, and Pearl Street remains this north-south bike route. This alternative C is kind of the bike route that's in the county-wide bicycle master plan, but it has a longer detour for eastbound bike travel for people who want to go to downtown Bethesda, kind of southbound from here. And then for the alternatives, if you notice on all the network alignment alternatives, the Cheltenham Drive segment between Wisconsin and Tilbury is common for all these networks. And that's simply because this is kind of one of the locations where we are able to cross Wisconsin Avenue at a signal and then connect to Woodmont Avenue separated bike lanes. So this kind of Norfolk Cheltenham is common on all these network alignments. So we wanted to look at Cheltenham Drive, kind of the bikeway facility options. And we have 5 options for this one block segment. Option 1 is conventional bike lanes. Now, again, this is not recommended in the countywide bicycle master plan. So we would be deviating from what's already adopted, and we would need very strong reasoning to deviate from an adopted countywide bicycle master plan. But again, we wanted to test it and look how it kind of matches with some of the other alternatives in terms of evaluation measures. So on top, you have the existing, which I kind of showed in the existing conditions analysis. We have 48 feet curb face to curb face, 1 lane in each direction with left turn lane and then on-street parking. If you notice, there's plenty of space for kind of the travel lane that's on the south side that's going east. It's 24 feet wide. So this option basically kind of restripes the existing roadway with 5-foot bike lanes on either side. The bike lane that's going eastbound would be sandwiched between a 10-foot vehicular travel lane and 8-foot parking. So this would be kind of tight. And again, we would be deviating from the countywide master plan. But this does keep all the existing on-street spaces, so there are no parking impacts in this option. And then when we look at some of high-level evaluation measures for each option, we have these 1, 2, 3, 6 measures. Bicycle comfort, we're assigning this as low because as a person on a bike, you'll be sandwiched between a vehicular car lane and on-street parking spaces that have high turnover. But the construction cost is low because it's only paint. Right-of-way and drainage utility impacts are low because we're not changing anything in terms of curbs or drainage. There are no parking impacts. The driveway bikeway conflict is medium because it's on one way on either side. So people coming out of driveways are seeing in the right direction where the cars and the bikes will be coming from. But there is a challenge because there are a lot of wide commercial driveways and the parking is pretty close to driveways. So there might be some sight distance issues that provide some safety concern. And then the last option, that last evaluation measure is the signal redesign at Wisconsin Avenue. Again, because we have one-way bike lanes on each side of the street, we don't think we'll have to modify that signal. Again, because it's a state road, modifying a signal is going to add time and money to the implementation process. So this is what it looks like today, looking east. And this is a rendering depiction of that option. Basically, we would have a striped bike lane with some green conflict paint at driveways and intersection. But this is basically a 5-foot sidewalk, and you're sandwiched as a person on a bike between a car and then on-street parking. And with these facilities, the dooring issue is a concern where people getting in and out of parked cars. The dooring issue with bicycle crashes has been a big issue. The other thing is, given the driveway widths and the number of driveways on this block, some of the on-street spaces come really close to the driveways, and there's concern with sight distance. So if you look at this image and if you imagine you riding a bike in this bike lane, sometimes it'll be hard to see a car coming out of the driveway, or for a person in the car coming out of the driveway to see you as a person on a bike. So again, those are some of the safety issues with this option. But again, this option keeps on-street spaces and is low cost to implement. Option 2 is one-way separated bike lanes. So this would technically be following the countywide master plan. It is separated bike lane. This would be impacting those 4 on-street spaces on the south side. So this would, again, keep the 3 lanes, so 1 lane in each direction plus a left turn lane, and use the parking spaces width to create that buffer between a bike lane and the car travel lane. So with this, the bicycle comfort is high because we are separated from vehicular traffic. The cost is medium because there will be some construction costs associated with building those medians, but we're not moving curbs or drainage, so that is low. There are 4 parking spaces impacted. The driveway and bikeway conflict is medium, again, because you're on the side of the vehicular traffic for a person coming in and out of the driveway. And again, there are no signal redesign modifications expected with this option. And again, a rendering depiction of this option. This is the existing. And with this, you'll have a median that could be a brick stamped concrete median or a precast median. And then again, that conflict marking at driveways. And this provides better sight distance and view angles for people on bikes to see look at the driveways, and vice versa for people in the driveways coming in and out. Option 3 is a 2-way separated bike lanes on the north side. This is an option where we are testing if we can fit everything we have or we want on this narrow, this 48 feet curb face to curb face. So we notice that we keep parking in this option, we keep the 3 lanes, and we have a 2-way separated bike lane. But the drawback is that all the widths are minimum or lower than minimum that are recommended in the standard. So 8-foot 2-way separated bike lane with 2 feet buffer that includes the gutter pan is substandard for a 2-way separated bike lane. So that is a concern here. Same thing here with 17.5 feet. You're going to have 10-foot lane or 10.5-foot travel lane and 7-foot on-street parking, including the gutter pan. So these are minimum or lower than minimum dimensions, and so it's going to be tight. So the bicycle comfort is medium because it's tight. The cost, again, with the separators between the bike lane and the travel lane, there's medium cost. But again, we're not trying to move the curbs. We're not expecting to change the drainage or utilities. The parking impacts are none here because we're trying to maintain that. And we're saying there are high driveway and bikeway conflict because it's a two-way separated on the north side. So people coming in and out of that CVS driveway or that alley, people generally don't expect to have two-way bicycle traffic, and they don't look to the right coming out of the driveway to see a bicyclist coming from the other direction. So that's, again, a safety concern. And with this, we might have to redesign the signal. So again, it's a yes. So again, this is kind of a rendering depiction. We are on the other side of the street now, looking towards Wisconsin Avenue. And this is kind of what it would look like. It's kind of tight, but we'll be able to kind of get that separation. We'll have to use that gutter bandwidth. So it's not ideal, but we're trying to test if we can fit everything in here. Option 4 is similar option, two-way separated bike lanes on the north side, but this tests if we take parking away and use that space to do a nicer landscape median or kind of just a wider median between the two-way separated bike lanes and the travel lane. And this, again, the dimensions here are much better in terms of kind of the standards. So we have 12-foot two-way separated bike lane with a 5-foot buffer, and then 10.5 outside travel lanes, and then the 10-foot left turn lane. So there's high bicycle comfort. Again, the cost is kind of medium. Right-of-way and drainage utilities are low because we're maintaining the original curbs and the drainage. The parking impacts are there with those 4 spaces. Again, because it's a two-way bike facility, we're saying high driveway, bikeway conflict. And again, we might have to redesign the signal. Again, this is kind of a rendering of what it would look like. Much wider two-way separated bike lanes. And again, with the wider widths for the medians, we might be able to do some landscaping. But again, there are some underground utilities. So if this is the option that we proceed with, when we start testing and developing initial designs, we might have to kind of remove the landscaping and have stamped brick or just brick, a different kind of a treatment. But again, it'll have a wider separation between the vehicular traffic and bicycle traffic. Option 5, the last option for this block, is basically a long-term option, what we're calling. It's a two-way raised separated bike lane. So this is where the curbs would move, and we would design a two-way separated bike lane at the sidewalk level, and then have the tree panel that separates the curb and this two-way separated bike lane. So very high and high quality bicycle comfort, very high cost because we're kind of reconstructing the street at this point. We'll have to most likely move the drainage and utilities to build this. But with just one separation between the curb and the ped and bike facilities, we'll be able to keep the parking. All the earlier options, because we were maintaining the existing curbs and adding an extra buffer between the bike lane and the travel lane, we no longer have to do that in this option because the ped bike zone is kind of one zone with one separation with the tree panel. Again, the driveway bikeway conflict, we're calling it low because with this option, we might be able to consolidate some driveways or redesign the driveways with better signage or better turning radii, maybe raised driveways that will help with some of the safety concerns in the other options. But again, with this, we'll have to redesign the signal. So this is kind of a high cost, long-term option that we're not sure if it's feasible in the short to medium term. But this is like another rendering of that option. This is kind of sidewalk level. We would have to design a tactile surface that kind of distinguishes the bike lanes and the sidewalk to make sure that the visually impaired pedestrians don't accidentally walk into the bike lanes. So that's that kind of the yellow striping between the bike lanes and the sidewalk. But we'll be able to kind of get trees and landscaping as part of the total reconstruction if that's the route this project goes in the future. All right, so this slide kind of summarizes all these options. Again, option 1, just kind of striped conventional bike lanes, low bicycle comfort, but low cost, low drainage into impacts, keeping parking. Option 2 to 5, all the other options are separated bike lanes, so they technically comply with the countywide bicycle master plan. Option 2 is the one-way separated bike lanes that has parking impacts. Option 3, two-way separated, we were trying to fit everything in. It's substandard in terms of dimensions. So that's a concern there. Option 4, again, two-way separated, it's wider, but has those 4 parking spaces impacted. Then option 5 is kind of the long-term option with high costs. And then whatever we end up with the option for the block between the alley and Wisconsin Avenue. If it's the one-way option, whether it's option 1 or option 2, we'll basically transition that beyond the alley to Tilbury to kind of keep the bike lanes on either side of the street. And in this location, we might be able to use that landscape buffer in front of the park to at least keep the bike lanes in one direction. Option 2 for this is basically, if we go with the two-way options, then we'll have to continue the two-way separated bike lanes on the north side of the street, and again, kind of eat more into that landscape buffer in front of the park and replant some of the trees there. All right, next I'm going to transition back to the network alignment. So we've been talking about this one block between Wisconsin Avenue and Tilbury. And that's really the most complicated block in terms of, what are the permutation combinations, pros and cons of all these options. But then the other question we're trying to answer is, what is the assigned bike route beyond Tilbury Street? So again, if you remember those 3 network alternatives, alternative A is kind of Tilbury and Sleaford. And here we have slightly different evaluation measures to measure these network alignment. So we have bicycle route directness. So how directly can you go from, say, Tilbury to Pearl Street? In this, we're saying medium as compared to some of the other options I'll share. The number of intersections you have to navigate are 2, basically the circle at Tilbury and then the Sleaford and Tilbury. And then there is a little bit of contraflow travel involved in here because Tilbury Street is one way for vehicular traffic northbound. So if this is the assigned bike route for two-way bicycle traffic, you'll have to travel against the vehicular traffic for this one block. And then basically we're counting the route length, which kind of matches the route directness in some ways. And then what are the parking impacts on the alignment? So in this one, we are not impacting any parking. And in terms of that contraflow bike lane on Tilbury, this is what it would look like. Basically, again, if you remember the existing cross section, we have about 17 feet from just the asphalt. So the gutter pan to gutter pan, or 19 feet from curb face to curb face. And we can kind of repurpose that space for one 11-foot northbound travel lane, and then one 6 feet southbound contraflow bike lane. So the southbound bicyclists would be able to use their own bike lane and not have to share the 5-foot sidewalk that's there today. And for the northbound, because it's a residential street, it's kind of a neighborhood greenway treatment where people on bikes would share it with vehicular traffic. And then once we hit Sleaford, we're not changing anything from existing. We're going to keeping on parking on the south side. There are already existing speed humps. We may add some sharrows and bike route signs or wayfinding signs to indicate that this is the assigned bike route. I think there might be signs already out there for this segment since it's existing bike route. Alternative B is a straight shot from Cheltenham Drive. So this is where, again, we'll have very heavy parking impacts on that residential block. So that's a major concern when we kind of test this alternatives. But we wanted to test this because this is kind of that straight shot to Pearl. We just have the traffic circle at Tilbury to navigate. There is contraflow travel involved because this whole longer block is one-way westbound. So for an eastbound bicyclist, they'll have to travel against the vehicular travel. It's the shortest route length. And then there are 20 spaces that will be impacted with this option. So this might be the fatal impact of this option is like those 20 spaces where houses don't have driveways and depend on parking. This might be a difficult option to proceed with. But then in terms of the cross section, it basically the contraflow bike lane will be on the south side going eastbound, and that's what it'll have impact on the parking. But again, this is one of the 3 options we're testing. And then option C, which is kind of the countywide bike master plan option, where we have Chase Avenue and Sleaford as kind of these neighborhood greenways, and then Tilbury Street that kind of goes northbound. So the route directness for this option is low because if you're again going south, a person on a bike technically would have to go up Tilbury and then Chase Avenue and then go south on Pearl Street. And there might be concern with people really following that. People might on bikes may still dart across vehicular traffic on Cheltenham or Sleaford or Tilbury. And then there's no contraflow travel involved in this option, but it's longer route length and it won't have any parking impacts. So again, in terms of cross-section, it doesn't change much. We might have to add some shadow markings and bike route signs if this is kind of the assigned bike route. But again, Tilbury, and same thing with kind of Chase, with maybe if we want, we can add some additional traffic calming, but this is already narrow traffic calm street. So some additional wayfinding signs may suffice for this option. So this slide just kind of brings all those three route options together. Alternative A, kind of Cheltenham, Tilbury, and Sleaford. Option B is straight shot on Cheltenham with parking impacts. And then option C is kind of that longer route with Tilbury and Chase for eastbound traffic. So I think those are all the alternatives. I know that's a lot of information to digest. So, at the end of this presentation, we'll have a Q&A session, but we're also gonna open up a survey on SurveyMonkey, and actually it's open. So if you want, you can use this survey link to access it. It has these options that you can rank preferentially. So it's kind of a preference ranking survey for the alternatives and the cross-section. And there's some additional questions that some of you, or maybe all of you, have already answered as part of the registration process, but we wanted to add those questions in case folks who did not register for today's meeting but want to take the survey and provide input. They can answer the questions that you did when you registered for the meeting. So there might be some repeat questions if you take the survey, but we definitely encourage everyone to take the survey and share it more widely within the community to provide us feedback on these alternatives. So the goal is to keep the survey open in October, I think till October 22nd, Pat, if I'm not wrong.
Correct, October 22nd, 3 weeks.
Yeah, three weeks from today, we'll keep the survey open, and then afterwards we'll kind of summarize the results and kind of review all these alternatives again and try to identify a preferred network option, and then 1 or 2 cross-section alternatives to kind of shortlist from these 5 and proceed to develop concept plans. And then we'll document this whole planning process in a final report by the end of the year. Again, this project is kind of funded in part by the Maryland Bikeways grant. So we will have to create that report for that grant kind of submission as well. Yeah. Okay. So I think with that, we can open it for Q&A.
Great. Thank you, Aditya. That was a lot of information, and we have all of the project documents online, and we will upload the recording. And if those of you need to go back and listen a second time, or email me, or any questions that you have, we'll be happy to answer at a later date as well. I am looking at some of the chat questions. So I'm not sure if I should start at the top or the bottom. Let's go back to the very beginning.
Yeah, probably from the start.
Let's see here. It seems like as you get further along, there are more detailed questions. So I think I answered to Mike Chapman. He's asked what the purpose of the Bethesda Bike Loop. Are we trying to connect the Capitol Crescent Trail across Bethesda, or do you envision bikers riding the circular loop or something else? I responded that the loop will allow for a safer east-west connector route, but it also connects south along Woodmont down to the Capitol Crescent Trail. Obviously, since we lost the Georgetown Branch Trail during the Purple Line construction, there was a need to create a better east-west connection. And was all part of the 2018 public forum. And at that point, we received funding of $3 million to begin the design and construction of some of these segments that you're seeing implemented today. Another question, someone is talking here, Tom, about the speed limit on the residential streets is exactly the same as it is on Wisconsin, 25 miles per hour. You just feel that there isn't proper enforcement. So that's something we could address with our police and our traffic division. So that's something we could note. Someone else is asking about through the master plan, there was a recommendation for separated bike lanes along Pearl. That segment, although there are recommendations in the master plan for separated bikeways, be it a shared use path or separated bike lanes, right of way will be an issue there. And that is not a segment that we are currently studying. So that's something that, you know, our study ends at Pearl. So that north-south piece between east-west and up to Sleaford is not under evaluation, but it may be something that, you know, we receive funding for in the future. But I can tell you that it is going to be a right-of-way issue, and that'll probably have to be a CIP project that needs to be funded down the road. And there will be greater impacts to property. So, so that's something that would be looked at in the future. Okay, so Andy, you mentioned that the Midas project, there's a new project. The project that we had been meeting with Park and Planning to have some discussions on the new Midas site plan, and we were trying to coordinate. This was very early on in our process. We hadn't even begun the survey work, so you know, it was very hard at that time to really provide any really accurate kind of guidance. We did, you know, understand that there was a parking structure as far as we knew it from the first design through the alley. Now this new project, we understand, will not have a parking garage. And so, you know, what does that mean? And in terms of the usage of the Cheltenham public parking garage. And that's a question, Aditya, that was raised. Those people, those residents would then use the public structure across the street.
Yeah, if I can just quickly add about that. I mean, the whole genesis of this project in many ways is the Midas property, right? Like the idea was there was redevelopment proposed, there was a sketch plan submitted, and, you know, as part of that development project, we were asked, like, what's the preferred cross section for Cheltenham, and that's why we wanted to study this, to come up with a preferred option. And during that process, I think that old sketch plan was no longer valid, and it is a new developer. I think it's pretty recent development, this new proposal. And I don't know what's the status in terms of if they have submitted a sketch plan or where they are in the approvals process. I don't know. So we'll have to look at more details about that proposal.
Right. Another comment was on car carriers park on the block to offload cars, tractor trailers. You know, also we're aware of that, you know, they're swinging into the CVS parking lot. So it's just a comment to be aware of. We have met with the CVS manager and several of the employees that have worked there for over 25 years, just to get a sense of, you know, what their concerns are. And we've also met with the Chevy Chase Acura property owner as well. So, you know, we do want to understand the daily operations of both of those budding property owners. And we will continue to work with them as we advance this project. Someone here said there was almost no traffic on Tilbury south of the traffic circle. I used to take that route all the time. Deborah, we understand that, but you're actually putting yourself in a kind of a contraflow. I don't think that's the safest, even though it's a low volume street. We would rather create a facility that's designated for cyclists.
Yeah, and just to add quickly, Pat, on that, like right now it says bicyclists to use a sidewalk, which is like a 5-foot wide sidewalk, which really isn't not a shared use path standard, right? It's like less than half probably of the width. And then like if that's going to be the assigned bike route, we really can't have a contraflow bike route without a contraflow bike lane, right? I mean, that's the concern there, is we're asking people on bikes to go in contraflow direction. So we'll need to provide, and it would be just restriping, right? It's not some major like improvement project. It'll be mostly paint for the contraflow bike lane.
Right. So in terms of, cost, it's on the low end because that was a concern, saving the money there and spending money where, where it's more suited. So someone also asked if that option B with the Cheltenham, I believe that the distance was 960 feet and was much less than some of the others that were like 1,200 feet in terms of the distance to get to Pearl. And someone was just questioning, was it really that much less? But I trust your measurements.
Yeah, but more importantly, like it's a straight shot, right? So if you just continue in Cheltenham, and it's basically between 900 and 1,200, it's like 300 feet, which is that one block that you go south on Sleaford. So that's really the one block south you have to go on option B, and then go on Sleaford. So it's a little bit more, and again, we're just trying to compare alternatives and test these on high level evaluation. So that's what we're trying to do there.
Mm-hmm. And again, we're continuing the Cheltenham preferred alternative. Whatever we recommend will be also the same cross section along Norfolk. So we're looking at it not only on the Cheltenham block, but across 355 along Norfolk. So there was some questions on, what would the cross section be once you're crossing over Wisconsin Avenue. So our thought process is that it would be the same cross section because we'd have to work through the signal timing and so forth, and connecting to the Woodmont cycle track, which will be on the west side of Woodmont.
Right.
Okay, scrolling down here. Corey, am I missing anything so far? Let's see. The bike lane.
I think you're hitting most of the big ones.
Okay. Cheltenham is a major ingress-egress street for East Bethesda. It is very busy most of the day. In addition, oh goodness, people keep, hold on, Corey. I somehow scrolled. Hold on here.
Maybe, Pat, maybe it would be helpful if people can also raise their hand and ask questions. We don't have to handle everything through the chat, since it seems like everyone's, as you're trying to catch up, more questions are starting to populate.
Right. But they're asking if we're going to address the impact on the businesses and maintain flow of traffic in and out of our neighborhood.
Yeah, so just quickly to answer that, Pat, I mean, in all our options, we are maintaining the current number of travel lanes and turn lanes. Like all the 5 options kept 1 lane in each direction plus the left turn lane. And in all the residential options, there isn't any removal of travel lane for vehicles. So technically that should not impact like the current flow of traffic. And as part of these options, we are maintaining all the driveways as well. Again, with the Midas property, that one driveway might close in the end, based on at least the previous sketch plan. They had proposed to close the driveway, and if this new proposal doesn't have any parking, or I haven't seen their site plan, so I don't know what they're doing with the driveway. But that's the only driveway that might be closed. Everything else, we're maintaining access as it is today.
Right, and that someone did bring up a question that the Midas development residents are not going to use on-street parking, and people that choose to live in these these are very small. If I read correctly, they're about 600 square foot units. So, very similar to what you see in Arlington, and most of those young professionals or, empty nesters or whomever, only have 1 car or no cars. So, again, we're learning more about the project. Right now, it's fairly new, and we really don't know much about what the development plans are, but we will find out more information. Okay, Corey, do you want to take some? Let's see, we passed through, let's see, 2 intersections at Sleaford. It's really a turn.
Yeah.
But you're right, that's correct. For option 5, would you have to take down the trees on the street? Good question.
Yeah, hopefully we can kind of relocate the existing trees. I'm not sure, but yeah,
Or
I mean,
replace them with,
yeah.
replace if
Yeah.
usually if we can't replace them on site, then we do contribute to a fund.
Well, we will have trees on that part of option, but it might be like, because we're doing a sidewalk level bike lane for that option, the trees are moved by like 10 feet, right? So we still will have trees on that street. It might be a different location, and I don't know technically if we can replant the same trees or allowed to put new trees.
Right. There was a question about if the bike lane is 2-way, can we discuss bike signaling? We did have a pop-up facility along Woodmont for Bike to Work Day in a couple of years in a row. And we had a 2-way on the north side of Cheltenham to Norfolk, and then connecting to the west side of Woodmont. That was just a 1-day event with police. And we now would have to look at, signal modifications and access permits and working with the state. But certainly we would need to modify the signals, and, with the 2-way, we would have bike signals most likely at the 355 intersection with Cheltenham and Norfolk. But that would be part of our further study.
Yeah.
What will happen next? So as Aditya said, we're planning to summarize all the public comments and kind of reevaluate these alternatives, summarize everything in our report by the end of this year. And we most likely will make a presentation to the planning board and to our council members. And then at that point, there will be some kind of a postcard announcement, or on our website, we can show, how we synthesized the results and, the recommended alternatives that kind of meet the goals. The further kind of design of it has not been funded, so we need to identify funding, and if we receive the funding, then over the next several years we'll be working on, furthering the design and getting to 100% plans for ultimate construction. But we will certainly come back to the community, and then there will also be opportunities with mandatory referral. And so the public outreach has not stopped tonight. It'll continue throughout the process. What metrics do you use to measure success of the project? That's a great question, Bob. The very first separated bike lane in Montgomery County was installed in 2014 along Wood Glen. And at that time, it was a very new facility type. It was actually installed before the adopted master plan, but there had been a lot of discussions about this. And there was at that time, a White Flint kind of separated bike lane network report. So at the time, we did some manual bike counts, and we found that before the facility was constructed, we had, I recall, 35 cyclists in a 2-hour period during a weeknight. And then 2 years later, we had, 1 year later, we had 54. And then 3 years later, and we had 112. So we noticed that the ridership increased when the new facility was built, because now cyclists felt safer, and there was something to connect the Bethesda trolley trail up to Executive Boulevard, which is where some of the destinations were. There was a new Whole Foods that was constructed in a part of the whole North Bethesda area. And then we recently continued that connection along Executive. And there, if you haven't been there, there's actually concrete bike medians. So we've actually upgraded from flex posts to a more protected design element. And that now is slowly kind of grown. The network now connects to Pike and Rose with part of our new shared use paths that have recently been built. So I guess it's a long way to answer your question, but the metrics is that the ridership increases as the network is built out. We're constantly taking, we're putting in some new automated bike counters, and we have some manual counts that we've just completed. So we're trying to keep better, metrics. And we do have to report to Park and Planning, because they have a kind of a report that they produce every 2 years. And so I think that would be something that would be available to the public. And I'll put some of that information on our website if that's helpful.
Pat, can we go to Caroline?
Sure. Do you want to go through her question? Let's see.
You should be able to unmute yourself, Caroline.
I guess you said just talk, so I raised my hand.
Yes.
I appreciate all of the thoroughness in the presentation. There was a lot of focus on the Tilbury to Wisconsin with the four parking spaces that you're trying to preserve, and just sort of calling out that on Cheltenham Drive, that is a loss of 20 spots. So much focused on those parking spaces, and a loss of 20 spots on Cheltenham, which I'm guessing is probably about 75% of those parking spaces, because it seems to be on the side of the road with more parking. But I also wanted to go to so it seemed like parking was a big focus of yours. And so so when you went to that box where you showed the different criteria for the different options, where you had green, yellow, and red, I wanted to understand like the weights that go on those. For example, like the number of turns that a person might have to take, or these people are on bicycles, and so going an extra few hundred feet, like what's the weight that goes on those different criteria, and how do you think about that? I guess that would be helpful to understand.
Yeah, Pat, do you want me to answer that?
Yes, please.
Yeah, well, thank you, Caroline, for the question. So you're right, parking was one of the key evaluation measures we wanted to study. And a lot of these options, like especially the direction, and we had some questions about that. I mean, the difference between the direction is not that much, right? Like it's like 1 block here, 2 blocks there. So there are 3 network alternatives, and it's really kind of high, medium, low. So we haven't come up with some very complicated weight system to kind of come up with a preferred alternative. And we wanted to kind of keep it at high level and simple so that we would be able to explain to everyone in the community what we're doing. And we didn't want it to have like a black box of some weights and points and create it more complicated than it needed to be. We're looking at 3 network options, so we could just go with high, medium, low for these. So that's why it's red, green, and yellow or orange. And so that's really where we are. And in terms of how we would kind of go ahead and how we think about this, I think the idea is that these are kind of high level, more technical evaluation measures. And then on top of this, we will consider all the public and stakeholder feedback we're getting from tonight and then through the survey. And then we'll just kind of regroup and see, is there a clear consensus within the community and then with the technical analysis, like, right? If there is, for example, if there is consensus that option 5 for Cheltenham with that raised bike lane is like, that's everybody's favorite. But then we realize, well, that's not going to be easy to construct. That might be, cost prohibitive. And so we might have to look at some other option, kind of a fallback option for the near and kind of short and near term. Same thing with network alternatives. I mean, you mentioned about those 20 spaces. I mean, the reason we didn't have like 5 different options for that block is the width is narrower than the commercial block between Wisconsin and Tilbury. So there are only so many things you can fit in within kind of the residential part of Cheltenham. And then because it's residential with, kind of a neighborhood greenway type treatment, we thought, at least the direction of vehicular traffic can share it with the bike lane. The concern there was the contraflow direction, if that's the option. And that's why, because Cheltenham Drive is one way westbound, the eastbound bicyclists would need to be on the south side of the street if you want to be riding on the right side of the street to kind of follow the general traffic pattern. So that's why it's the south side. It's not really because like there are more or less parking spaces. It's really kind of following the traffic pattern there because Cheltenham is one way westbound for vehicular traffic. I hope that answers your question. Pat or Corey, I don't know if you guys want to add anything more.
I think that was good. I think we're going to continue again, what we're hearing tonight and what, people are asking for is shedding some light and how we're evaluating each of these alternatives. So, we could kind of take another look and try to see if there's other ways to, put a weight on some of these. So
yeah.
There's a lot more questions here, and I really was hoping that we could engage more people. If anyone else has their hands raised rather than going through the chat, as Corey, you mentioned. Is there anyone else that would like to speak up?
Looks like Amy's raised her hand.
Okay.
Go ahead, Amy.
Hi, I don't know if you can see me, but hopefully you can hear me.
We can hear you.
Wonderful. So I think this is sort of to echo a question that was sort of half answered, but I'm not sure I quite sort of know the answer, right? So a lot of, I'm sure the people on this chat, may have a vested interest in this because we live here and we drive here and we bike here and we walk here and we do all these things. Once the survey responses come in and you put together your report, sort of, you guys will work on this all day. We are doing other things during the day. How do we know what that recommendation is so that to the extent we have any further thoughts to provide, to whoever the final decision maker is, we'll know what the recommendation is. Sort of like, how do we find out?
Right. So if you have registered and we now have your email and contact information, for sure, everyone that's registered will get a postcard or another newsletter that will indicate that there's a preferred alternative. We would also post that on our website. It could be just a link that you need to go to. So I'm not sure how the format, but you will get a notification. There's also, your East Bethesda, Andy is your president of the, Citizens Association. He will also be notified, or whomever. And then there will be another opportunity when it goes to the planning board. That would be another step in the process. So you would have an opportunity for like public comment. And at that point, we're usually still in the preliminary design phases. So either you'll have an opportunity at the concept phase where we pick this preferred alternative, or then again in the early design phase when it's presented as part of mandatory referral.
Okay, that's very helpful. And so you said if you have our email addresses, we'll get a sort of a newsletter or postcard. Will that come in just the mail or in the email or both?
Both.
Okay, wonderful. That is
Yeah.
terrific. Thank you.
Yeah.
Pat, Chuck wanted to ask a question, so I'm going to unmute you, Chuck.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
You can.
Great, thanks. So with the pandemic, I sit at my front window on Cheltenham, the Tilbury to Pearl block every day looking out. And every day I see cars speeding down the wrong way, mainly probably many of them BCC kids looking to get to school around the corner. I've called traffic enforcement. They've never responded to set up traffic control there or enforcement. So it's a dangerous block because people continue, they just come in off Wisconsin, hit the circle, go around and shoot down our block. And because they're consciously breaking the law, they speed, making it even worse for everybody, the kids, the pedestrians, even other cars. So have you factored that reality of life on the 4600 block of Cheltenham into the impact on this proposal?
Well, it's kind of hard to, we hope that, there'll be restrictions on kind of people breaking the law, and we won't have to kind of consider that as part of the alternatives evaluation. But you're right. I mean, there might be people who are doing that right now. I don't know if there are any other tools within the county toolkit to kind of stop this behavior, Pat or Corey, because I don't think we want to encourage this behavior and kind of consider this as a fact of life when we're evaluating bike options.
But it is a fact of life.
Yeah, I understand.
Every day, and it's something that any good study would take into account.
Yeah.
If people are out there actually looking at the neighborhood and evaluating the realities of life in the neighborhood, that's something the expert should see.
Yeah, and I think couple of ideas on that is, one, maybe there's more need for traffic calming on that block. On some of the other streets, there's more speed humps, and maybe there's some other traffic calming treatments we can do. Apart from that, I think the circle itself, I think it does have like do not enter signs. I think there might be some other tools at that circle that we could put in to further, stop people from driving and speeding in the Contraflow direction.
Well, high school kids aren't going to get that, especially when they're on their way to class. So yeah. If you lived here, you'd see what I'm seeing and everyone on this block is seeing, and it's not easy. It's getting worse, and the cops don't care.
I don't know if in the past there's been speed studies performed, because obviously there has been traffic calming. So over the years, your community must have requested that. It's something that, we can discuss with our traffic division. But there must be a long history of cut through and speeding in this neighborhood. So we may have to go back and take a look at, what's been done in the past and what could be done in the future. But that's something that requires additional studies that are not part of this feasibility study, but maybe part of the larger design effort.
Pat, looks like Jonathan would like to ask a question. I'm going to unmute you, Jonathan.
Okay.
Thanks very much indeed. I appreciate all the information presented and the very, very detailed discussion. If you don't mind, though, I would like to return to the question of weighting the different alternatives, because I honestly don't feel that was acknowledged as it should be. And in addition to trying to weight the different 5 categories there, I think there's even a question, particularly comparing alternatives A and B, whether the colors are actually right. Someone pointed out that alternative A actually really only has one intersection. The road bends, but there's only one intersection. So maybe that should have been a high for alternative A as well as alternative B. In terms of directness and route length, I almost feel like that's double counting. I mean, I think they're basically, I mean, I'm not sure what the difference is. I assume that really the thing that would be of decisional significance would be the length of the route. And so we see that alternative A is 240 feet longer than alternative B. And I mean, I think it's really worth considering, how important that is. I mean, to just, if you wanted to kind of telescope alternative A versus alternative B, it almost looks to me like we're talking about 20 parking spaces versus 240 feet length. And again, I'm not suggesting a precise weighting there, but it seems like intuitively it's, and I have to say, I live in the 4600 block of Cheltenham, so I certainly have a strong vested interest in this. But at a minimum, I think everyone has a right to expect a very, very sort of clear statement of the trade-offs before the evaluation is made. Well, thanks for the opportunity to add this input. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Some good points here. I'm looking back at the chat, Corey. Let's see. How is East Bethesda being engaged? This was our first community meeting, but if there's another meeting that you would like for us to attend, we'd be happy to schedule something with your on your time at your next meeting. Again, this will be recorded and on our website, so you can certainly share this with other residents. And certainly you can reach out to me and I can respond to any emails. Let's see.
I think Andy has
His hand raised. I agree with
turn and 240 feet.
Yeah.
someone asked if the funds, oh, I'm sorry, I'm just going through all these. The question was, are the funds for Cheltenham only to be used for Cheltenham or elsewhere? The Bikeway feasibility study funding that we received as part of the grant must be used for this study. Then the next phase, which would be the design phase, will look at this segment between, Cheltenham, between Wisconsin and Pearl. But if we felt that there needed to expand the scope, that obviously would require more funding, and that's to be determined. But again, if there is some type of concern or a connection to another destination that we've overlooked, it's something we would consider as part of our future project. I'm not sure if I've answered. Is there any other questions that someone would like to raise their hand if I've not answered it as part of the chat?
I think Andy was trying to raise his hand. Andy O'Hara. I'm not sure.
Someone's applauding, I think.
He might want to raise his hand. I'm not sure.
Oh, Andy, oh, here he is. Yeah.
Okay, Andy, you can ask your question.
Oh, and Pat and Corey, thank you so much for arranging this opportunity to engage on this project proposal. And so I guess I wanted to answer a question that has been posed by a number of folks. What is EBCA doing in regards to this particular project. So I'm president of the East Bethesda Citizens Association, as some of you may know. And so I've had a number of conversations with Pat about this project, and we've been aware of it for a number of months. And so we're tracking it very closely. We're very sensitive to the impacts on the potential impacts of every one of the options. And we are hosting a fall virtual EBCA meeting on October 28th. I already have a pretty long agenda for that particular meeting. But if we can't squeeze this particular project discussion into that meeting on October 28th, then we'll plan to include it in a discussion that we have in the spring. But that was the question that I asked, Pat, was about the fund transfer. So I think you did a nice job of answering that for me. So it turns out that the funds that you guys have been using for this are just strictly for a scoping analysis. It's not for any kind of funding for construction or what have you, that would not happen until several years from now, perhaps, based upon the pace of the decision-making on these kinds of projects. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, yes, the first part is the scoping part is limited to this Cheltenham feasibility study. We may have some funding in the Bikeways level of effort program and in our facility planning CIP to at least continue the work that we just began, because, we just received, 2021 information, a survey, to wait 2 years, sometimes then you lose, that information. You'd have to spend the money again to, resurvey or to collect data. So having said that, I'm not sure if we would just try to find funding through the CIP programs that are level of effort programs, just to get us a little further along to maybe 30% design, because then we can also obtain some real cost estimates. And that will also help, make decisions, and also presenting this to the planning board and to our elected officials, having kind of a cross section of representatives from your community and from the business owners and from cyclists and elected officials that represent these constituents, and at that point I think we'd have a kind of a better synthesis of all the options. I mean, hopefully we won't have 5. We'll whittle them down to 2, and then maybe from the 2, once we develop cost estimates, it may help provide kind of a better solution for the community. And there's going to be trade-offs as well, and again, the master plans recommended a bikeway facility type, and our role at DOT is to then kind of implement the lines on the map that were drawn. I'm sure your community weighed in when the master plan was developed. There was a Bethesda downtown master plan and a countywide bicycle master plan. So there must have been some, input at that time. So
Pat, I can definitely speak to the sector plan. So we were very actively involved in discussions on the sector plan, and every single property that abuts Wisconsin Avenue that aligns with the western edge of our neighborhood was a very key focus to us. We were concerned about height, we were concerned about density, we were concerned about impacts on the 2 pocket parks, one of which is on Cheltenham Drive. We didn't quite engage in the same level of detail on the bikeway plan, at least at the time that was being constructed, because we viewed that as being much further out into the future than the potential impact on development along Wisconsin Avenue. And it is one thing I did want to note. We did talk earlier about the Midas project, which has changed significantly from the initial proposal, as you talked about earlier. It's now going to be essentially a studio and 1-bedroom high-rise apartment structure with no parking underneath. which is going to have significant impacts on that garage across the street. In addition, we do have permit parking in our neighborhood, both along Cheltenham Street and a number of other adjacent streets in our neighborhood. And those parking restrictions are continuously being violated by people. And so we would expect that for 300 new young residents living in a building on that street, they'd be looking to park their car in a place that was free. So we're very sensitive to the potential impacts that that project will have on parking in our neighborhood, in addition to the impacts it'll have on traffic on that street, which will impact any bikeway that will be constructed. But not just the Midas project. There's plans to reconstruct the CVS. They're not as far along as that for the Midas location. And there's certainly in the plan itself, opportunities to construct very large structures across the street from the CVS. So there's going to be a lot of construction going on in this neck of the woods for the next decade. And I would hate to see the county invest such significant sums in a very, very short block with a very high value bikeway when we're just going to have to reconstruct the thing several times. Very sensitive to that. In addition to the impacts that any kind of bikeway, whether it's separated or not, will have on the traffic flow along that street. And that is something that I think needs to be studied further as part of this bikeway proposal.
Well, Andy, you've made a lot of great points, and we're very sensitive as well to, investing in a bikeway project that would then be, torn up in 3 or 4 years. So, the coordination between DOT and the development review team and park and planning is critical. And we won't advance the project beyond 30% if a year from now, let's say, we will know more about these other development sites. So I don't think if we could just find the funding to advance the project from a feasibility study to a little bit more of preliminary design where we can at least feel like we could, look at utilities. I mean, if we're adding a curb on top of a water line or a gas line, it's expensive for whomever to have to relocate a water line, let's say. So maybe one of those options looks beautiful in the rendering, but in reality, it'll cost, $1 million instead of, $500,000 or 3 times that amount. So it's hard to make a decision when you don't realize, what the impacts are and the costs. So we can't really do that with this level of, of a feasibility study. But what this does do is it at least begins the dialogue. And so what we've heard tonight and what we've, received in a lot of the initial comments is very valuable in helping us to, look into, the recommendations. So the second, part of your question about, well, this is down the road, 3 years of funding, we may have some money for some preliminary design, but I don't think that it would go beyond that at this point because we haven't identified funding, and it would need to, be vetted into one of our CIP programs.
Thanks,
I don't know
Matt.
if I've answered all your questions, but we can continue our conversation, and we'd be happy to present in the future if you have a spring meeting, or we can keep each other informed, Andy, of what's going on in both our communities. So,
well, thanks so much, Pat, and let's continue our conversations. I appreciate it very much.
okay. There's a couple of other hands raised. I don't know who was first, Mike Chapman or Kenneth Berman.
I think Kenneth was first. So Kenneth, you should be able to ask your question.
Sure, thanks. And I apologize for my confusion on this score. I'm really focusing on the streets east of Tilbury and the options you presented there. And I understand that, you know, one of the options would involve a dedicated bike lane on Cheltenham, which I'm not sure is a great idea. But do the other options involve dedicated bike lanes? I asked this question because several years ago, or maybe a few years ago, the planning people, I think, held a seminar on maybe the Greenway, and they seem to contemplate putting in a dedicated bike lane on Sleaford, which would have eaten up the lawns of the people on the south side. And I just wanted to make sure, because based on this chart, it doesn't seem to be the case that that's what you're considering. But other than Cheltenham, is that something that's on the table? Dedicated bike lanes on those other streets?
So I don't know what you mean by dedicated. Do you mean like just separate painted bike lanes, or with like some physical separation?
Either.
Okay, so the only streets that most of the streets, so Chase, Tilbury from Cheltenham to Chase, and then Sleaford Road, we're not recommended any dedicated bike lanes. These would be kind of what we call neighborhood greenways, right? So these are residential streets and people on bikes would travel with vehicular traffic. Now on the Cheltenham Drive for alternative B, there will be the option is if that's the route, then because it's one way, the other direction for bicyclists would need a bike lane. So there'll be just one bike lane, not two. And same thing for Tilbury between that short block from Cheltenham to Sleaford, because that is currently a one-way street for vehicular traffic. If we want to assign that as a bike route for bi-directional bicycle traffic, we would need a 5 or 6 foot bike lane for the other direction. So southbound for Tilbury, we would need a bike lane. Or if we go down Cheltenham Drive, if that's the option, then we would need some bike lane for people on bikes to go eastbound, because it's currently one-way vehicular streets. So only on one-way vehicular streets where if we want the bicyclist to go against the vehicular flow, we would need some sort of 5 or 6 foot bike lane, which we are calling a contraflow bike lane. Oh, does that answer your question?
It does. I mean, and I'll let, obviously the people on Cheltenham can speak for themselves. I live on Sleaford. But one thing I would throw into the mix, I'm sure you've noticed, but over the past year and a half, there have been a lot of delivery trucks in the neighborhood, not just a couple of times a day, but all the time, every day. And I just wonder how those trucks fit into these fairly narrow streets if there's a dedicated bike lane, because I don't think it works, but I'm probably wrong on that. And I think it could be dangerous for bikers and others. So,
yeah. What are the delivery trucks doing today on, say, like Chase or Sleaford?
They are delivering things from Amazon, and there are UPS
no, I know, but
trucks
where are they stopping on the street?
in front of the house where they're making the delivery.
Okay.
At least that's what they're doing on Sleaford.
But in the roadway, as they're just in the
To
middle
the
of the
extent
road?
they can pull over, they pull over, but that there's not enough room on those streets typically for a car to get by a delivery truck, for example. So this is unrelated, I guess, to the bike lanes, although I guess the bike lanes just accentuate it.
Yeah,
now, the deliveries are usually quickly done, so the delays aren't that significant, but they're there. And my guess is they're going to continue to be making deliveries for the foreseeable future.
Right. Yeah, I mean, for Sleaford Road and Chase Avenue, if that's the alternative that's picked in the end, we don't expect any change from the current cross section. It might be just new bike signs, like this is a bike route with some wayfinding of how to get to the trail or downtown Bethesda, but we're not looking at dedicated bike lanes on Sleaford or Chase, which are really kind of the narrowest streets in this study area.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so Mike Chapman.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I just kind of like to take the opportunity to advocate for a connectivity of the Capitol Crescent Trail from, I guess, the Georgetown branch. You know, that's a problem that has yet to be solved as a 30-year biker here in the neighborhood. You know, the focus on the A, B, and C east of Tilbury, you know, I guess we need to give some thought to that, but I'm just emphasizing the connectivity across Wisconsin, which again has never really been solved for the riders on the trail. So getting to the Capitol Crescent is a, you know, I would say should be a major focus. And so the Tilbury solutions, many of those, I'm not Tilbury, the Cheltenham solutions, you know, the first block off of Wisconsin, several of those look great. But I would also just echo the others who have said, you know, it's got to continue across to the west side of Wisconsin and find its way, you know, back into your plan to connect with the trail. So let me just advocate for that point. And then the second comment I just want to make is I wonder for choices A, B, and C, you know, going into the neighborhood, do we really even have to pick one? I know there's safety concerns, which you guys are trying to manage and do appropriately. But I mean, again, we've kind of been dealing with this for many, many years. And the real problem is getting across Wisconsin. Once you get across Wisconsin, there's lots of ways to get down to the Capitol Crescent. So I wonder if there's just maybe multiple options and you don't really even have to, you know, construct something major to accomplish that.
Yeah, and thank you for that comment. I'll just address the last part quickly. We all these options beyond Tilbury are really kind of paint and signs options, like, right? Like the question is, what should be the assigned bike route? The county currently has a sign that says bicycles should use the 5-foot sidewalk on Tilbury from the circle, which, you know, we're thinking like, you know, that's not ideal for people on bikes, especially if you want to connect people who would be on Woodmont Avenue, two-way separate bike lane, trying to get to Georgetown Branch Trail, and having in the middle to go on a 5-foot sidewalk that's shared with pedestrians. So that's one challenge we're trying to address. And you're right. I mean, there might be all these streets as we saw in the bicycle level of traffic stress analysis. If you are riding with vehicular traffic, all these residential streets are pretty comfortable because they are narrow. They have some traffic calming already there. So we may not have to pick one, or at least the neighborhood, you know, people in the neighborhood riding bikes, they may not need to pick one street. But the question is like, what needs to be the assigned bike route that goes eventually to Georgetown Branch Trail? And if that assigned bike route includes some bicycle traffic that's going to go against the flow of vehicular traffic, how do we accommodate that? So
Yeah.
that's the topic we're trying to resolve.
Sure. Okay.
Okay. It's getting close to 9 o'clock. It's 8:50. So I'm wondering if we've addressed everybody's questions. Is there something else that someone would like to discuss? And again, I encourage you to submit anything in writing. If you could please take the survey that will be posted online sometime early next week. So please check our website. And I hope that if there were any other questions that you'll go back and listen to the recorded meeting, tell your friends. The more input we have, the better. And we will be, you know, getting back to you once we summarize our findings. And again, it may be in the form of another newsletter or a postcard that would give you the link again, notifying you that there's more information on our project website that we've uploaded. So, and also via email, since you've registered, we now have you all on our distribution list. Any other chats, Corey, or hands that I'm missing?
I don't, there have been some just general comments nothing new, I think. There've been a couple of requests about the slides, and I told folks that we would post the slides up on the project website shortly, like in a couple of days.
Mhm. Yep. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for your time and for participating. And we will get back to you in the next few months.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good night.